Welcome to 4-to-1 Counterpoint. This is the fourth video in the Counterpoint series of species counterpoint. We had 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, and now 4-to-1. Along with an introduction to counterpoint, an introduction to species counterpoint, a video going over the difference between modal and tonal counterpoint, and some videos going over the 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 counterpoint responses found at the end of each video, which you'll also find at the end of this video. Okay, so 4-to-1 counterpoint. This is written in quadruple meter, usually in 4/4 as you see here, common time, but it's any ratio of 4 notes over 1 note. In a quadruple meter, of course, your first beat is your downbeat still, your second beat is a weak beat, and your fourth beat is also a weak beat. The interesting thing here is we have the third beat. The third beat is a medium beat. It's still accented, but it's not as strong of a strong beat as the actual downbeat as the 1. Because of this, I call it a medium beat, because it's somewhere in between the strong beat and the weak beat. So it's somewhat of a medium beat. It's still accented though, so we have some rules to apply to this. Only consonant harmonic intervals are allowed on beat 1, the downbeat. Beat 2 and 4 are the weakest, so they can have dissonances and consonances. They're both just weak. Beat 3 is accented compared to beats 2 and 4. Because it is accented, it can form consonances, but unlike beat 1, beat 3 can have dissonances if dealt with properly. Here we see some unaccented dissonant passing tones in quadruple meter. So on beats 2 and 4, there are the dissonances. And of course, being dissonant passing tones, they're approached and left in the same direction. But I go over that in my 2-to-1 counterpoint video. The point is that these are unaccented, so this shouldn't really be a big deal because we've already been using unaccented passing tones, so there's nothing really new here. Okay, this one's pretty similar, but now we have a dissonant neighboring tone on beat 2, still the weak beat. In the 3-to-1 counterpoint video, it is explained that the dissonant neighboring tone will not be allowed on the final beat, so in that case it was beat 3, and in this case we're doing 4-to-1, so our last beat here would be beat 4. And the same thing still applies here, so on that last beat we're not going to be doing a dissonant neighboring tone, so here on beat 4 you do see a dissonant passing tone, and this is allowed because as you can see it is approached and left in the same direction. But if we put a dissonant passing tone there, being surrounded by the same notes, we would have the same note on beat 3 as we do on the downbeat of the next measure. We don't want this. We can understand and use this later on. So in these cases, it's going to be inevitable that beat 3 is a consonance because dissonances are always surrounded by 2 consonant intervals. So if beats 2 or 4 contain a dissonance, then beat 3 has to be a consonance. Here we see a dissonant passing tone on the accented third beat of the measure. To form a dissonance on beat 3, beats 2 and 4 both have to be consonances. This analytic diagram expresses B as the dissonant passing tone between A and C. You can also think of the passing tones in this way, where A and B are both passing tones, A being a consonant passing tone and B still being that dissonant passing tone. But they are passing tones in the harmony of what's going on here. So C and G is creating that fifth, so we have a C major chord, C major is being hinted at the time. And then on beat 4, we also have a C, so it just creates a C octave. So reinforcing that C, we could think of the 6 and the 7 as passing between that. Or you could think of 7 just as a dissonant passing tone. And to give some more harmonic background of what's going on, either way of looking at it, you could look at the harmony in a similar way as when you throw the 6 in there, it's going to switch up the harmony a little bit. And in this case, having an A with a C on the bottom might hint at an A chord in first inversion for a moment. So whether you're looking at that as a passing tone in the second example or more as part of the harmony in the first example, you can be thinking about it harmonically similarly as hinting at a first inversion A chord. And of course, in both these situations, if you're looking at B as the dissonant passing tone either way, you still have E after the A. So if you are thinking about this as an A first inversion, because you have C on the bottom first, and then you have A, and then that goes to E. So having A and E on top of that C, that's a first inversion A chord right there. So we have all the notes to give us an A first inversion. The only time that you'd have to label this as a double neighbor tone is when you have dissonances on both beats 2 and 3. Here we have a dissonant diminished fifth on beat 2 and a dissonant fourth on beat 3. Both of these dissonances are acting as passing tones, filling in the space of a fourth between the consonances G and D. So remember that. You can have passing tones filling in the interval of a third. So you'd have one passing tone, but you can also have passing tones filling in the interval of a fourth. So there you'd have two passing tones. Dissonant neighboring tones can occur on the accented beat 3 of the measure. We want to include at least a few accented dissonances on beat 3 to add some variety. We do not want the harmonic intervals to become too predictable by only putting dissonances on the weak beats every time. You can also have two dissonant neighboring tones on beats 2 and 3. This acts like an octave that is prolonged with a lower and upper neighbor tone, creating a dissonant 7th and 9th. So these would be known as double neighboring notes. You can also have, I think it's in other countries, they call it an auxiliary note. So here you'd have a double auxiliary note, and you'd have a lower auxiliary note and an upper auxiliary note. It's another word for neighboring note. Pay attention to how the first neighboring tone B is not recovered in the next step to C, but instead it leaps up another neighboring tone before resolving to C. So thinking harmonically here, we have that C octave, and we just have two dissonances bouncing in between that, but they're happening right after another, so double neighboring notes. If we change the first note in the given melody to F, we can see that it is possible to have one of these neighboring notes as a consonance, while the other one is a dissonance. In the harmony, it's still acting as a neighboring note. In this case, it's just not acting as a dissonance. Because of this, we still notate it the same way. Okay, so now being in 4-to-1 counterpoint, we can see that we're moving up the interval of a diatonic fifth from one downbeat to the next downbeat. If we go way back to 1 counterpoint, we're only going up a second from downbeat to downbeat. 2-to-1, we're going up a third downbeat to downbeat. And in 3-to-1, we're going up a fourth. So each time we're able to go a little further, having some more notes in the counterpoint. By the time we get to 4-to-1 counterpoint, it becomes really easy to move a far distance, because even if we're going in stepwise motion, we're going up a fifth. So if we throw in some leaps in there, you can already imagine to where we can go a lot further distances, a lot easier in 4-to-1 counterpoint now. And of course, that wasn't very easy starting in something like 1-to-1 counterpoint, where every time we'd want to go somewhere further away, we'd have to leap there. So of course, the leaps would make it stand out more. And then with leaps, there are the rules in how you want to resolve them. So basically, as we progress from 1-to-1 counterpoint to 4-to-1 counterpoint, each time along the way, it's going from difficult to easier to move a far distance. So now we have no problem making a high point. We're able to move up and down to lower registers a lot easier. But the real problem is how to make the melody not jump around, how to stay in the same location when you're going to a nearby note from one downbeat to the next downbeat. And it's all going to be explained in a second, but it's basically saying, let's say if you want to go from one note in a downbeat in your counterpoint, and the next note in your counterpoint is just a step away from that, in 4-to-1 counterpoint, how are we going to end up basically in the same location on the register on the staff, when the nature of the melody wants to move a further distance? And now, similar to before but flipped, it started easy to stay in that similar location, and now as we prolong to 4-to-1 counterpoint, it's becoming a lot more difficult to stay in that same area in the register. Here is Fuchs's 4-to-1 counterpoint example found in the Gradus ad Parnassum, along with Mozart's edited version of Fuchs's example. This will show us how real composers dealt with the problem of keeping the melody in that same area in the register, or at least ending up there. So let's give both of these a listen, and then we'll observe the analytic diagram versions of both of these and analyze what Mozart changed in Fuchs's original. So for the most part, Fuchs uses imperfect consonances on each of the downbeats on beat 1. Try to follow in these footsteps. It shouldn't be very difficult to find a note that is a third, sixth, or 10th away from the given melody at all times on each downbeat. So as you can see, measures 1 to 2, Fuchs and Mozart did the same thing. This is easy because simple stepwise motion up creates a consonance on the next downbeat A. From measure 2 to 3, Fuchs aims for a C, making a third harmonic interval. From A in measure 2 to C in the downbeat of measure 3, we only have the distance of a third apart downbeat to downbeat. But with 4 notes for every 1 note in the counterpoint, Fuchs has to figure out how is he going to buy some time during this. So looking at measure 2, from A on beat 1, he uses an embellishing tone on beat 2, which allows him to return back to the same note A on beat 3. Then using a dissonant passing tone B, he's able to arrive to his goal on C. We look at the same measures 2 and 3 in Mozart's example. Mozart replaces Fuchs's embellishing tone with a dissonant lower neighbor tone, G. Since Fuchs did not use the dissonant neighboring tone at all, this was not an option for him. So as it was explained in the 3-to-1 counterpoint video, Fuchs did not believe in using the dissonant neighboring tone, so that's something you're not going to find in his examples, in his books. But later on, music theorists thought it was a good idea to use it, and as we're going to be seeing here, it's actually going to help out in a lot of situations being able to use this. Even though Fuchs's embellishing tone is consonant and Mozart's embellishing tone is dissonant, they both serve the same process. They're buying some time here in the melody, slowing things down a little bit melodically, and allowing us to reach C on the next downbeat. Moving on to measures 3 and 4, we see that Fuchs on the next downbeat aims for another harmonic third B, meaning his melody only has to move down a step compared to before. So here we have an example of what I was saying, to where the counterpoint is only going to be moving a step from downbeat to downbeat. So let's see what Fuchs did. Okay, so starting on measure 3, we see something interesting right off the bat. We see a dissonant passing tone that is left by a third. So that's a little different here, but what's going on is Fuchs is using something called a nota cambiata, something that is good to know, but it belongs to a specific style and period of music. B creates a dissonant fourth below the given melody E, and then the dissonance is left by a leap down to G. This shows that B is not a passing note nor a neighboring tone. So as you can see now, I unlabeled it as a dissonance. Fuchs allows this, but later theorists disagree with its use because it goes against teaching a style-neutral approach of counterpoint. It is good to note that the nota cambiata comes from a modal counterpoint writing style, which relates to the music of the Renaissance period, the pre-Enlightenment period before the Baroque period. It shows up in later forms of music as well. We're not going to be using it in these exercises, but you can always go research it on your own time. I'll actually post a really good video about it in the description. Mozart replaces the cambiata with another dissonant neighboring tone, followed by a leap from C to A. This allows the next downbeat B to be a recovery of that leap. On the downbeats of measures 4, 5, and 6, Fuchs moves from a third to a 10th and then to a third again. Moving from a third to a 10th works well because of the contrary motion in the given melody and the counterpoint. So as the given melody goes up, Counterpoint's going contrary motion down. That works out perfectly. But from the 10th to the 3rd, Fuchs ends up creating a very jumpy, disjunct melody in order to reach his goal within the parameters that he is permitted. Notice that in measure 6, he chooses to land the downbeat on the note D, which that same note is only a step away from the downbeat on measure 5 if he chose the D an octave lower, but instead he chooses the higher D as his goal, which is a 7th away from where he's starting from. This goes along with the fact that in 4-to-1 counterpoint it's easier to move a large distance and more difficult to move a short distance. Fuchs uses a leap of an octave from E to E, then he leaps in the opposite direction to B, before a consonant passing tone to C allows the downbeat to be approached in contrary motion. So in this case, I'm not going to be labeling this as a passing tone because it's not dissonant, but as you can see, I am labeling the double passing tones as the 2 filled-in note heads, which is just highlighting the fact that there are 2 passing tones. And I don't want to start filling in consonant passing tones because then there'd be a pretty good amount of those. So in all, the end result from measure 5 to 6 in Fuchs's counterpoint is a pretty disjunct melody that leaps a lot all in one place. So maybe if there were some leaps that got recovered, but you see a large leap of an octave, and then from there it leaps a 4th. Mozart's version is different. On the downbeats of measures 4, 5, and 6, he moves from a 3rd to a 6th to a 3rd again. Choosing B on measure 5 creates a 6th. He is able to do this because he has the option of moving a dissonant neighboring tone, A, on beat 2, allowing the melody to remain more conjunct when heading to and arriving on the next downbeat B. B just steps down and then goes in stepwise motion back up to the goal D. If you compare the first halves of each of these responses, it's easy to see that Mozart's end result is a lot more conjunct and stepwise. The leaps throughout do not hinder the overall shape of his melody as it flows up. Okay, so it's good to be able to picture how the flow of the melody is going. You could even just draw a picture of it, which is always good, but I'm going to follow with my mouse. So here we can see Mozart's melody. It starts going up, does a little swoop going down, it's creeping back up, does a little swoop down, and then it steps down, and it's going up a little bit, but then it's stepping back down, going up a little bit, stepping back down, going up. So it's doing this on a micro level, but we're having it's going up, up, and then we're going back down just a little bit, but then right after we're going down, we start to go back up again, okay? And with that, there's little micro things in the middle of it. Again, it's not hindering overall what's going on at all. But on the other hand, if we look at Fuchs's example, we can see we start going up, and then all of a sudden we go down here. And then we go back up, and it's like we're continuing in the same register as before, and there's just that random gap in the middle. Okay, we keep going, and we keep going, and then all of a sudden we go down here, and then it leaps way up here, leaps down again, and then we're going to our destination. So harmonically, we could justify what's going on here with the notes that are chosen within the harmony and the melody, what's going on. But if you look at the shape of the melody, you can see it's not the most stepwise, it doesn't have the most melodic fluency. And that's because it is following the same register all throughout here with that kind of bump in the middle of it. But then as you approach down here, all of a sudden, it's like we're starting the melody again right here. We see the stepwise motion, but we have that big leap in the middle of it. And you can already see that in Fuchs's melody. It doesn't get much better in the measure after this. So let's keep going. Let's just sum up the fact that Fuchs's melody has some sharp turns to it, and the lower registers stray away from and discombobulate the shape of the overall melody. Even if they're justified harmonically, it's affecting the flow in its entirety. And so when we compare those two passages, we can see how helpful a dissonant neighboring tone can be. Okay, so now I labeled each of the measures with Roman numerals just so you can see them. So don't get confused with chords. These aren't labeling chords or anything like that. It's just showing you which measure we're at. Okay, so looking now at measures 6, 7, 8, and 9, Fuchs and Mozart agree. Notice how this section starts and returns on the same exact interval of D and F, creating a third. So here on measure 6 and here on measure 9. Fuchs needs space to be able to create a mostly conjunct melody that arrives at his goal. To accomplish this, he creates a large gap in the register by leaping down a fourth and then leaping down a fifth. And remember, recovering leaps of a fourth is not necessary, and we see this in Mozart's counterpoint responses. This combination of using a fourth and a fifth expand the melody by an octave by using a two-note filler from where it started from. This buys some extra time compared to just leaping down an octave. Of course, the fifth is then recovered in stepwise motion in the opposite direction. Leaping down the fourth and the fifth, creating this octave gap, calls on the melody to fill in the gap in the register that is just created. Filling in the gap allows the melody to travel up in stepwise motion in contrary motion from the given melody. Now in measures 9, 10, and 11, Mozart and Fuchs disagree again. Fuchs's counterpoint is a bit over the top. His goal is to move a half step from D to C sharp. To accomplish this, he creates a very disjunct melody. Similar to before, from D he leaps down a fourth to A, and then from A down a fifth to D. From D he leaps up an octave back up to D where he started, allowing him to descend a half step to C. So as you can see, just looking at the shape of the melody of what's going on here, we're just going from D down to C sharp, and we end up doing that at the very end. But to lead us there, we're jumping all over the place. And again, if we're looking at the flow of the melody, how it's nicely flowing, it's not very nice here at all. In these cases, we're going to be shooting for melodic fluency. Again, this is when we're just looking at the shape of the melody. So when we're looking harmonically, we can justify these leaps by saying that they are related to the embellishing tone as they arpeggiate through a single harmony. So in this case, it's just arpeggiating a D minor triad. Here's a quote from Jacob Gran. If you're going to use the arpeggiations in your exercises, only use them as a last resort, and even then know that they work better in a lower voice versus a higher voice acting as a melody. Moving on from here, Fuchs is following the old convention that the penultimate tone must be the leading tone, while Mozart's cadence is highlighting chord 5, and then it's doing a 5-to-1 cadence at the end. This actually sounds really good and works out really well. So going back to measure 9, Fuchs could have leapt down an octave to D, and then could have gone stepwise motion back up to D, but this would reuse the same ascending scale figure as right before. So we don't want to establish motivity in these, so that wouldn't be a good idea. Okay, so as they say, mo beats, mo cadences. Since we have a lot more beats now, we have more cadence options. The simplest being a stepwise motion starting from where you're starting at, just going stepwise motion to your ending note, your final cadence. So as you can see up above, we're going to start on a third above the given melody and go stepwise up to that last final note. Going down below, we start on a sixth below the given melody and we go stepwise up to the final note. Other than that, there are 2 more options for going up above and 3 more options for going down below. Here's a Cantus Firmus by Mozart to teach his student, Sir Thomas Atwood. So we have one in C major and one in D Dorian, but as you're going to see, there's something interesting with the one in D Dorian. So you can choose to do your counterpoint exercises just like this. If you do want to do them just like this, you might want to follow in what I'm going to be doing next. And that is to do responses for both of them, starting in this upper range of the treble clef and the soprano range, and then writing counterpoint below that in the what would be the alto range, and then also writing 2 counterpoint responses above, but starting in the bass range. So not only are we going to now be reading the bass clef, but we're going from bass to tenor, which allows us to have some more freedom with the intervals. We're allowed to go to a compound fifth now, and you should shoot to do some things like a compound fifth in your counterpoint response, because this is more like a real life situation. When you're writing counterpoint above your bass line, you're going to be using your tenths and your twelfths, while when you're in the other voice ranges, so from when you're in your tenor to your alto or alto to soprano, you're going to want at most an octave between those voices. So you can always practice it just how it's being taught in the video to where you can just go up to a tenth. But I think it's much more practical to be doing it this way, to where in this case we're going to be in our soprano range in the treble clef and then writing below that in the alto range. So we're going to do at most an octave between these voices just to practice writing in the soprano to alto or the alto to tenor. And that leads me to the exercises themselves. So I transposed the exercises. This is the first exercise that was in C major. So with that, I was able to do two different major scales, E major and A major. So I will have these as a PDF in the description. So you can download it and print it. You can even just have it on your phone, write on your phone, whatever you want to do. But we have the Transposed Cantus Firmus by Mozart, and we have it in E major. We're going to write below it. And then we're also going to do A major and write below it. So it's just one of each. And then again, E major above and A major above. But now we're reading in the bass clef. And we're also going to be using some bigger intervals like some tenths and twelfths, or in other words, compound thirds and compound fifths. Next, I was saying that the Dorian Cantus Firmus was interesting because in the whole melody, it doesn't include the sixth degree of that Dorian mode that it's using. And because of this, we can't really tell if it's in Dorian or if it's in minor. And this is because the difference between Dorian and minor is a flattened sixth degree, but if we don't have that sixth degree note, we can't tell what that note is. So we could probably say the intent of that melody was to be in D Dorian, but without this sixth degree, it doesn't give us enough information, and it also allows us to transpose in minor. And also we could consider it minor. So we could have looked at that as D Dorian. We could have also looked at it as D minor. Because of this, I transposed it to G minor and E minor. So that's the same deal. You have a G minor below and you have an E minor below. Same rules, you're writing in your soprano and you're writing below that in your alto range. So only an octave at most between the voices. And that is if you're following the method I'm doing. Next, just like before, now we have the G minor above and the E minor above, but now it's in the bass clef. So again, we're reading in the bass clef, and now we're working with minor scales. And again, same rules, we're able to do bigger intervals now, like tenths and twelfths. This is, of course, if you're following the method that I'm going to be doing, and I think this has a good reason to it, because not only are you practicing the mindset and the pattern that when you're in your treble clef, you're only doing an octave at most below that, but also, if you look, we're doing each response also in the bass clef to where we are able to do these bigger intervals. So I think one reason why you would want to start off just by doing two voices and including things like tenths and stuff like that is because then you can expand it to, let's say we had a 4-to-1 counterpoint that we liked and the counterpoint is written above, so the 4 is above, the 1's on the bottom. So we put the melody up above in the treble clef and we put the bass line down in the bass clef. In doing this, now we have the bass line and the melody of the song. So that might be a good reason to be writing some bigger intervals like tenths and stuff like that, because you're thinking about this just in two voices for now and expanding it later. But I think the way that I'm doing it actually works out pretty well for two reasons. And one I already explained, it's already getting you in that pattern of mindset that is more like a real life situation. And then two, if you want to use that method, you can start still from the bass range and then build above that, which is what a lot of people argue how people like Bach composed. People often say they always composed from the bass up and they never composed from the treble down. So in this, it's going to get you in that pattern of, if you're going to be writing these two voices that will be expanded, establishing a good bass line and a good melody above that. Which, if you think about a lot of good songs, some of the most important things that make a good song are having a solid bass line and a good melody above it. And of course, there's stuff in the middle of it, helping it out or accompanying it. But really, the outer layers that make a good song are just that simple good bass line, good melody above it. So that's it for this video. I'm going to have another video on third species counterpoint, which is going to be going over a more modal approach to this whole counterpoint. It's still going to be third species, so this is third species, but it's actually going to be teaching it out of a different book. So we're going to be combining information from Fuchs and also information from a more tonal counterpoint approach, all staying within the parameters and following rules that Bach would as well. So that's it for this video. If you want to check out some responses, I have 2-to-1 counterpoint responses, 3-to-1 counterpoint responses. I'll put those in the description as well with my other counterpoint videos if you missed any of those. And I'm also going to have a 4-to-1 counterpoint response from this video. So if you want your response to be included in my next video, just send it to my email. And that's it. Bye-bye.